Welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Emmett Muckles. Please visit iTunes, Stitcher, or emmettmuckles.com to listen to all the episodes for free.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Billionaire Lifestyle Podcast with your host, Emmett Muckles. Welcome to the day. Welcome to the moment that you start. Welcome to now. Welcome to the world. If you woke up this morning, if you made it through the day, or if you're starting your day, you got another chance. What you have to do is live in gratitude. And this is something that most people forget, is they forget to be thankful for the things that they have versus searching and striving for the things that they want. Because if you're grateful for the things that you have, the good things that you have in your life, then more will come because you deserve it, because you're living in gratitude. And remember, you are a billionaire. 30 days after mommy and daddy got together and he shared some information with her, you were over 1 billion cells and you hadn't even hit the planet yet. So revel in the fact that being a human being, you are a special creature, just like the stars in the sky. We are boundless and we are unique. On with the show. Today, my guest is Dr. Morgana McCabe Allan. Works with frustrated entrepreneurs to help them fall back in love with their business. You know, I'm going to say this. When I was reading her bio, this not only translates to business owners, but it also translates to those people who are in a job, because we have this thing that lasts about 2 years where we're in love with our job and all of a sudden the relationship falls off. So some of the information that we may impart today may be transmitted over to a life for those who are not entrepreneurs. What's up, Doc?
Hey, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And you're absolutely right. The things that I teach actually apply whether you're in a 9-to-5 or in academia or in entrepreneurship. And I've done all three over the years.
So what has gotten you to now? You know, across the world, especially in industrialized countries, we grow up to think we have to have a job that someone employs us. But there's a shift in the world, especially with COVID and financial crisis. People are saying, I may be better off redefining my lifestyle and doing this on my own. So what got you to the point where your expertise said you could do this?
That's a really good question. And I'm going to talk about my PhD for a moment, but I just wanted to underscore the fact that it's not because I have a PhD, I was qualified to start a business or anything like that. It was much more about the experience that I had. So as a doctoral student, it is incredibly competitive. Every time you move forward, you're one of a tiny, tiny percentage of people, and most people don't get to go forward, right?
Yeah.
There's less and less place, there's less and less money, it's more and more competitive, which is not something that I actually realized I enjoyed. I was a very high performance candidate. I passed my undergraduate, master's and PhD theses without corrections, but it always cost me something. You know, it was always like, I literally handed in my master's thesis on the Friday and started the PhD on the Monday, and I felt like dead inside. I wasn't celebrating that huge achievement. It was nominated for awards, and I was just like, oh, I know I've got to do even better than that now. To feel good about myself, I've got to feel even better than that now. And the truth is, actually, you know, I'm a multiple trauma survivor. I had a huge amount of inner work to do, and as I was doing that work in relationship with my PhD, because those two things are deeply connected, I realized that I don't have to compete to be good enough. Yeah, I don't have to compete to be worthy. I don't need to measure my success against somebody else's. I could just show up and do what I'm great at for myself, for the people that want to receive that, and be in my lane and not really care what anybody else is doing. Yeah. And that really appealed to me in a very big way. And the other thing is, at the same time, as I move forward in academia, and this is the same in any corporate structure as well, I started to see the really toxic underpinnings. As you move forward, you see how sexist it actually is. You also see how systemic racism is fundamental to the structure. And in the particular field that I was in, where I was in anthropology and archaeology, there's so much of the study that actually appropriates African and Native American history and culture in order to sort of understand more sort of earlier societies and other places in the world, and that is not right for so many reasons. And so I started to protest that and to really move in a different direction, and to break away from how my field operates. And of course I felt a lot of resistance there, like there's a big structure that's acting back and saying, if you go that way, you don't get any money. If you go that way, we don't invite you. We don't have you in the conferences and things. And for me, one of the most important things is to be in integrity. And so I'm not going to zig just because everybody else zigs if I think it's wrong. So ultimately, I would prefer to go on my own, even though it's scary, rather than participate in sort of aspects of toxic culture, toxic for me personally, toxic for other people. So I left and I started my business.
It's funny that everything that you said is true. And this is the one thing, because here in North America, there are certain groups of people who, and we talk about this privilege in America that people have. All Americans are pretty much privileged when you think about certain segments of the world. But there are some cultures that have been appropriated, and the appropriators don't even see it.
Yeah. I have to confess, though, that it's no wonder. Now, keep in mind, I've been in the back end of the system, like looking at how history is constructed, how society is constructed, how gender roles are constructed and stuff. That was my job for 8 years. That was what I researched. The extent to which is invisible, people don't realize that, for example, all medicine is emergent from cultural construct, which means it's all biased towards white, male, affluent bodies.
That's
so all medicine, because of the things that are researched, the way that they set the standard for whether or not something passes the test, like all of these things, it's all based on what's great for those like white well-off guys, and everybody else kind of is an outlier to some degree or another. And the other thing is, of course, being an outlier can be invisible. So aside from the fact that I've got invisible African American heritage, I'm also bisexual. I have an invisible disability. So there's all kinds of ways that you can look one way and actually be something else. Yeah. So it's very complicated.
Yeah, that is so true. And a lot of people don't recognize what the system really is. They just think it's the status quo. One of the things you said was about appropriation, and we're just having a conversation here at this point. Is I realized historically, as I traveled through Europe, there's a good documentation of the history.
Yeah.
And I was in Vienna one time, and I went on this tour, and I'm looking at this history of Vienna, and I look at my wife, and I said to her, and it's not just Europe that is part of this, but the world is. But I looked at her and I went, "You guys have a violent history." She was like, "You have no idea." But one thing that I, and this is what I want to get to, one thing that has happened historically with cultures that have been outside Europe, and this is not a Europe bashing, this is just a fact thing, is that as colonization happened, they took away their doctrine. They took away their knowledge base. And so you only think of one thing that survived, which is a lot of things that came out of Europe and some out of the Middle East. And, that doesn't help. In addition to, like you said, people don't realize that all of our norms are based on a small segment of the population. And one thing that I learned from my wife, who's a doula, she says, "Do you know that many doctors believe that African Americans have a higher threshold of pain than most people do, so they don't need, like pain medication and stuff like that when they're going to surgery?" And these are little things you learn. Me as an African American man, no one's ever going to say, "Oh, well, you have a higher threshold of pain." They just won't serve you. But that's interesting that you were able to honestly see the view of what is. So you've gotten into business, and what is the one really most powerful piece of advice that you share with your clients who are entrepreneurs and they're having a mental struggle, or they're just can't find their heart anymore?
So, the one thing I bring people back to over and over again, and I work with people from their day one in entrepreneurship right up to 7 and 8 figure business owners, is that you have to find your way of being in the world. And I really work closely with people to honor their embodied experiences and to recognize their personal and their intergenerational trauma histories, to recognize their cognitive alterity or neurodiversity, to recognize how they are and move and be in their body, and to build a business that actually feels good and feels right to them, to find the mission that's really important to them. So I would always say to people, don't start a business and then recreate the 9 to 5. Don't start a business and recreate the system that you've come from. But that's what most people do because it feels familiar, even if it was toxic, even if they hated it. They still think that productivity is related to the number of hours that you work. They still think that you're not doing it right if you're not at your computer for a certain number of days or whatever. And that is just simply not the case. The way that you actually create something that feels empowered and joyful to you, and it feels the same way for the people that you serve, because when they get your sort of genius, they get the best of you. That's really powerful for them when they hear your real story. So not the version of you that you think, oh, I've got to share just the appropriate version.
Right.
And I used to only share the appropriate version of me. I never used to talk about, I a long time ago, I was a stripper. I've already shared some other things about my personal journey. I never used to share any of that. I just showed up with like professional hat because I'd come from academia. And academia, there's no space for you to be who you really are. You've got to be. There's a very sort of specific prescribed way to show up, right?
Yeah.
And so we come into entrepreneurship and we show up in the way that has been prescribed from the industry that we've come from. And that's not what the online space like needs or wants. It's not what even if you're even setting up a local cafe in your community, so maybe it's not even an online business, they don't want you to show up with Starbucks energy. Don't show up and recreate the system that you've already been inside. I really believe in what I call transformational business, that it's business owners, small business owners that grow into become bigger business owners, right? That we can change the world. Because we don't have to believe in those old gender norms. We don't have to subscribe to particular ways of being in the world that have been emergent from that white, affluent male body. We can choose to create businesses that reflect our unique incredibleness and that speak to other people that have a shared embodied experience of the world.
I have a business coach. And she said something so profound to me. She said, you don't need everyone. You just need a few raving fans.
Yeah.
And if you have a few raving fans that you can help or solve a problem for, they can sustain your life. And until that moment, it didn't dawn on me. You're iterating that on the back, on the low end. Like if you find your authentic audience, and you serve them well, that's the goal.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's actually the goal, even for the clients that I have with 7 and 8 figure businesses. They come to me and they're not feeling happy in their business. And they still have all those things we talked about. They still feel like, oh, well, I've just achieved this thing, so now I've got to achieve the next thing. Yeah. And that thing felt like nothing. It's already gone. It's like, that's old news. It's not even good anymore. And I have to hit the next milestone, and it feels empty. And there's always this fear that, but what if it gets taken away? Like, what if somebody wakes up and realizes that I'm an imposter and comes and takes it? Like, people still have those feelings. 7 and 8 figure business owners still have those exact same feelings of somebody's going to find me out. I used to think I would grow out of that. And one day when I was doing my PhD, I said to the head of my department, when will I be a real grown-up academic that doesn't get that anymore? It's like, never. And so even people at that stage in the journey, the real conversation that I have with them is about how can you be more authentic? How can you show up with more of yourself? How can you recognize the conversation that you want to be in with that soulmate client and forget everybody else so that you can have the joy?
There's a question that just kind of popped into the fray. So oftentimes people with these coaching businesses or they're solving a problem, they are the answer person. Do you have clients who struggle with, who do I go to when I need answers?
Oh, yeah. And so what I really try and support people to do is become their own answer person, to actually, tap into their higher self, to have more faith in themselves, to actually understand and acknowledge their genius, and also to have the confidence to ask for help. Because very often people, they think they're looking for an answer person, but actually they were just frightened to ask the question, and they're trying to find somebody that they don't have to ask the question because that person will psychically intuit it and answer it for them without them ever having to ask. Yeah. And so I really, really try. And one of the things I do when people come and work with me is I get them to make the commitment not to go and sign up to a bunch of programs and sort of jump on all the shiny objects and start doing, 55 different things. And I'll say to them, stay here in the work with me until you find the version of yourself that can answer nearly all your questions. Because then you're going to only pick the one right, the one engagement ring type piece of jewelry that's for you instead of all the shiny things.
Yeah. I was recently going through, because a lot of my guests are coaches and people who are helping other people. And so I stopped for a minute and asked myself, what's the value in it? And then I thought about it. You're getting a nonpartisan person who doesn't know, really you and personally what you're going through, so they can see it from a different view, and they don't have and tell me if I'm wrong, and they don't have this weird emotional connection to you like your friends have, because your friends may be biased because they're attached intuitively to your emotions and give a biased opinion versus a non-biased opinion. Is that kind of correct?
So it's absolutely true that your friends give a biased opinion. I mean, honestly, everybody gives a biased opinion because we can never fully disentangle from our biases. And even I spent years and years understanding what our biases are and how to untangle them, and I still have them, right? And I work on it every day. But the difference, though, is that coach, that person that can support you, the person that can elevate you, take you on that next level of the journey, their bias is towards your success because they've seen all the possibility. They know what is out there. They've seen other people with half your qualifications and half your determination go 3 times further than you even imagined you could go. So they're biased to see that. Whereas your friends, they've come up inside the same structure of where you already are.
Yeah. So,
we've talked about this before. If they're inside their 9 to 5 or whatever, that's what's all familiar to them. So they're going to see with that lens, and they can't see that long distance of where you could get to.
So what makes you keep going day after day? What's the inspiration to keep it going? Because we can find a passion, we can find our shiny thing, but then the shiny thing starts to dull after a while. But for you personally, what inspires you to keep doing the work?
So what has inspired me for the past, it's been the same thing that's inspired me for a very, very long time, and it's the people that I'm here to serve. And this started in my kind of teens, actually, which is what led me into my research area, which is, being the kind of underlying thing throughout all my academic career and up to now is really, as long as I come back to service. So I will never stay passionate about the thing that I could get. I'd just be like, oh, I don't need that card anymore. I'm not going to show up or whatever, right? That would just not work for me. And I can never stay passionate just for the qualification. I mean, I did my Ph.D. for 7 years, but there was long periods of time in there where I'd be like, I could just walk out. I don't need this. This is really hard. And what always kept me going is knowing that there's an impact that I feel really driven to make. There are people that I feel really driven to serve, and thinking about those people and thinking about the ones I already worked with and the amazing results that they've created, and then thinking about the ones I've not worked with yet that one day will meet me and we'll have these beautiful relationships and we'll do that work together. That's what I would show up for, or what I do show up for.
Awesome. In, I think it was 2007, I came across this thing called The Secret, and it talked a lot about manifesting. how can manifesting help entrepreneurs with their business? Because, the message was given kind of weird. Like if you just think it, it will show up. But sometimes you have to show up. Think it, you have to show up for it to manifest.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, I want to be super clear. I have no doubt that manifesting is real. My PhD is on how our identity and reality are co-created within every person, place, thing, idea, social constructs, energy that we engage with, right? However, what the secret tells you manifesting is like teeny weeny little, it's like getting one sprinkle and you're like, where's the cake? We are all manifesting all the time.
Yeah.
Every single thought and emotion that we have, every belief that we hold, whether or not we know that we have it. Also, the way that we treat our body and the way that our body, so like, you'll know this. How is your energy and how do you show up if you're hangry versus when you've had a good meal? Or versus when you've eaten 4 times more than you should at a barbecue and you have a food baby and you're just like, no, I can't eat this, right? So because we're multifaceted, embodied beings. And so you're manifesting all the time. Every single thing in your reality is something that is emergent from things that you've done. However, it's also a co-creation. It's not you alone. You're not the only actor in the world out there acting with impunity, just doing anything. And this is where I find the contemporary narrative around about manifestation to be incredibly toxic, because the rest of the world is also acting back. So we're co-creating with everything, which means that it's easy to say to that white rich guy, just think it and it will appear. Because the whole world is like literally his shape and size, right?
Yeah.
But you say that to anybody else, and that's not necessarily the case. Because for somebody who is, for example, a trauma survivor or somebody with an intersectional identity, the world is not set up for them to think it and for it to appear. And also, with the best will in the world, their thoughts and beliefs and things are going to be totally different than that guy that's like, of course I can get any job. And just to use one example of this, just women will see a job application and be like, oh, you know what, I've only got 90% of the stuff on that they're looking for. I'm not qualified. I won't even apply. Like, they would never pick me. I won't apply. A man, this like white, affluent, middle-class man, will look at the exact same application and be like, oh, I've got 50% of the stuff on this list. This job is mine. And the reality is he'll get the job because he's just shown up with that. Another way that, I've seen this, sort of personally, so in my family's life, we grew up, we came from like quite a poor background, but my brother and I both have PhDs. We're both in the LGBTQ plus community. So we both have it, and he also has an invisible disability as well. So we have a lot of sort of stuff going on, right? Yeah. He met a girl who is half as qualified as him, and he told her he speaks like 9 languages. He has a PhD. He's a dancer and choreographer and stuff. And she's like, oh my God, if you were like one of us, meaning like the rich people who the world is set up for, it's like, if you were like one of us, you would be touring the world, speaking at every university, you'd be on every stage, like, but instead he was working for basically minimum wage.
Yeah, and we see that often where, or the narrative speaks to it, that you can have everything, but they don't take into account, or the creators don't take into account sometimes, that there are situations that don't boost you toward what is being said. And I am so grateful that you said that, because if I were to meet you on the street, I literally, because of America, I would say, oh, that's a white woman. She has everything.
A Karen.
I wasn't going to go there, but I'm just saying, appearances are very real and people make snap judgments. This is a biological thing that helped us survive. We make judgments so that we can survive. Except I always say this, particularly in North America, a certain segment of the population, their natural predators have been eliminated. So they move with impunity. They just, I can do this, while there are some other groups who still see their predators very real and have to battle them daily. And other groups don't look at it like, well, I'm doing this. How come you're not doing it? It's like you don't understand the demons that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. For instance, me, I have to move very carefully. I am not a small man. And my ex-wife told me this. She was like, you can be intimidating. I'm like, me? I'm the jovial. And she was like, yeah. She's like, you have to be very careful because people will take you into a fear base. They won't show it necessarily, but they'll show you it. There's this fear because of the preconceptions that media, life has put upon them because they haven't experienced anyone. And in that vein, I reconstructed a lot of things that I did and try to be mindful of what I look like from the other side.
So that really, it makes me so sad, but it's so common that people have to be less than they really are and take pieces of themselves away to try and fit better. And those pieces are really important. They're really important to our well-being, but they're also really important to our collective experience, which kind of brings me to another thing, which is where I see people create the most success. So interestingly, I work with quite a lot of people that have broken from their church because they've been inside of a serious amount of indoctrination, and then they come out and it's like, oh, I don't know how to put myself back together at all right now.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, that I say over and over again is that the act of lifting others up, we also rise. It's collaborative. And so my doctoral thesis is actually a great deal about collaborative agency and about how we co-create with everything else and with everybody else. And that when you actually start to act in collaboration with others, and you've got these great co-creators that are on the same wavelength as you, and you're creating something together, then that's so much more powerful and creates so much more momentum than when the culture of one person trying to create everything on their own in a world where everything is acting back against them. And I think that part of the reason that we've actually been indoctrinated into this idea of individuality, that we are individuals, and it's like the American dream is the most individual storyline I can think of in any culture. It's literally like me against the world.
Yeah.
That storyline serves capitalism, and it serves the status quo. It serves these like toxic structures that we've been talking about, because it stops people from forming these like incredible collaborations that would, move everybody forward. Because those exact same people don't know each other's out there. They think each other is competition. They're not working together, and everybody stays in the small place. So that brings me to the second thing that I would share to anybody that's out there, whether they're a business owner or working in a 9-to-5, is actually start to look at other people in the context of collaboration, and how can you be an incredible collaborator with them, and bring a great energy and receive a great energy in relationship with them, rather than thinking everybody else is out to get you and they're your competition and that you've got to get one over on them or anything like that.
Yeah. Since you're outside the country of the United States, you're coming from a different social climate, cultural climate. Some of the things that you probably experience are universal on this planet, especially for industrialized nations. But what themes do you see that are typically holding people back from being successful and achieving their dream?
So actually, most of my clients, or a significant number of them, are in the US. So I think a lot of the things I see are very universal. And the main thing is not realizing the extent to which that we actually are indoctrinated into a system that doesn't serve us. So like it genuinely is like we're not taught how to ask questions. So even when people think that they've learned how to ask questions, they're asking it's like that a tiny little layer of questions, and there's so much more. Like, for example, science isn't actually real. It's a belief system. And what I mean by that is that every single thing that we measure is culturally constructed. People have chosen what to measure. They've chosen the increments by which they measure it. They've chosen the degree to which they will accept variation on those measurements. They've chosen how often to measure it and under what conditions. They've chosen which conditions are relevant and which ones are irrelevant, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Right? They've also chosen how many, how many examples qualifies as, well, this is science now, that varies a lot. So the things that we think of as being scientific are in fact actually underpinned by human constructs, by choices, by imperfect measurements, by human action. They are not unbiased. And yet, even when people think they're asking great questions, that wall is impenetrable for most people unless you actually have somebody like walk you through it step by step by step by step.
Yeah, I see that, and I realize I'm that person. When someone wants to teach me something, I need to see the big picture first, and then I need to see literally the steps along the way. Most of us have to figure it out, but I deconstructed it because by day I'm a trainer, and I realize adult learning is different than what they taught us in school, and adult learning should have been what they taught us in elementary school.
Oh, yeah. They should be teaching children how to think and how to ask questions and how to be creative. They should not be teaching children any facts and figures and stuff like that. But I mean, that's another area where I've been active to try and be part of educational change as well.
So you work with a lot of women. What challenges do female entrepreneurs versus male entrepreneurs have to overcome, which don't have as big of an impact as what men would be doing or experiencing?
So one of the main one that I would say is the witch wound. And I would say, just to be absolutely clear, this does impact some men. It impacts some men from some specific cultural backgrounds, but also impacts some men in every culture. But what the witch wound really refers to is that people that experience themselves as having some inherent form of magic, go back a wee bit in time, used to be executed for witchcraft, right?
Yeah.
And most of those people were women. So it's like, oh, she's doing stuff with your wife would be the perfect example. She would definitely have been killed as a witch. There's no doubt. Like a doula, that's definitely witchcraft. And so there are lots of things that women, like qualities that women had, like caring for the sick and the elderly and being involved in birth and charms and amulets and things like that, that were all called witchcraft when women were killed. Yeah. And women were killed for hundreds of years. And now we roll forward to the present day, and there's epigenetic trauma, and there's a culture of women's voices being dangerous and being suppressed. And what you can see, if you look in the Scottish witch trials, where I spent a lot of time researching these, is that the good women, so these are the ones that were the victims of witchcraft, these were the Karens of like the 16th, 17th, 1800s.
The Karens.
The good women, in inverted commas, are like cows. They give their blood, sweat and tears. And actually, women and cows are victims in the exact same way. So it will say, excuse me, sir, but that witch was stealing milk from my cow. That witch was stealing milk from my wife. Totally interchangeable. And the bad women, the dangerous women that were killed as witch, were like cats. And there's loads of association. Cats were also killed for witchcraft, and women were killed. So if a woman's cat went to somebody's house and that person got sick, the woman would be killed on the belief that she had turned into her cat and gone to the person's house. So cats and women were really, really closely connected. And if we look at now, we call women catty and stuff like that, right? And there's still a huge amount of debate around about breast milk. Like, that's just an ongoing thing where how well women produce milk and how they feed their children things is like public conversation, as though anybody's entitled to have an opinion on that, and you're not doing it right. Like, anybody can get in on the chat about how you're feeding your baby. And on the other hand, we also still vilify women for doing the things that cats do, for going where they're not supposed to do, for having loud, noisy voices, for being out late at night. It's your own fault if you're out at night, like these kind of things, right? So that's actually carried on through hundreds of years. And so for women showing up and doing something like starting a podcast or showing up and doing live videos is scarier for the most part. Now, I don't want to overgeneralize and say it's only women or it's all women, and I don't want to say that it's no men, because that's not the case. But on balance, that's one of the problems that I see very prevalent for women, is that there's an inherited fear of sharing your voice, because women's voices are one of the very first things that would get them straight over to the being tried for witchcraft. And that does apply in other cultures as well, because unfortunately, the foundation of the European witch trials was the culture that founded colonial Europe. So it's threaded through, and it impacts other cultures in similar ways because white people took it with them.
Yeah, a lot of that migrated to the United States in the early years in Massachusetts because they brought that culture with them. So you had the Salem witch trials, you had some other things that were happening. And a lot of it was, and I have to be careful here, a lot of this was this Puritan ideology that you could only be this in the interpretation, because a lot of people don't realize that the Bible was only interpreted. A lot of people couldn't read. So you had these people who could read and would tell you what to think instead of letting you figure it out for yourself, which gave a lot of crazy things happening. But one thing that you said that I identify with, and I've said this to many American feminists that I've had conversations with, I'm like, you and I are on the same boat. I'm like, you have to understand, I am a man of color, and I suffer a lot of the things that you suffer. Plus, I have to be a man.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. But that's exactly why I say it's not all exclusively women, and that you have to take into account culture and things, because absolutely, it's very nuanced, and there's a huge amount of the experience of Black people, which I can't personally understand, but as part of my family heritage, there's knock-on effect in terms of generational trauma, which of course I won't go into today, but it gives me enough insight for me to recognize that it has to be taken incredibly serious, and that we have a job to do. All human beings, especially white human beings, have a job to do in terms of actually really making space for the embodied experience of others, and understanding that it might not be so easy for somebody else to speak up. You can be the sitting there in the room and thinking, well, somebody needs to raise their hand, and maybe you're actually the only person that can raise your hand and say this is wrong. And that's why I've committed to that in my academic career, because it's not for somebody else who doesn't have that for me to say, well, look at them not raising their hand, but I'm not doing it. And if it means that I have to be uncomfortable, I inherited that.
Well, awesome. Well, how can people find you?
So you can find me on my website, which is morganamccabeallan.com, or on Facebook, where I am Morgana McCabe Allan, which is the best place to find me because I'm on there a lot. And I'm very friendly. I don't bite, and I love people that come and connect.
Do you do any online meets or spread information online? Do you have any forums besides, do you do any live presentations to let other people understand?
I do. So what actually happened at the end of 2020, a rogue ads company got my Facebook and my Instagram pages permanently disabled, which was really unfortunate. And I spent a long time appealing to hopefully get them reinstated, but that did not happen. So my social media journey kind of looks like it's back to square one. It's like a brand new baby, but we're here and we're doing it. And I do have live videos in my free Facebook group. And I actually have a live series where people can come and join me in Zoom sessions. Sorry. I do a weekly live call where people can come in and join me to talk about a new way of doing money mindset, because I really want us to actually move away from the exploitative methods of business and to start to be much more inclusive, much more collaborative, and to conceptualize money differently. And I hold a weekly live session about that.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on This has been a very interesting conversation, and I did not know it was going to go the way it went. So I really want to thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope it's valuable for people. I never know where these conversations are going to go either. It's always a mystery.
That's awesome. Well, as I said, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, remember this. We are human beings. Hue is reflective of color. Now, let's decipher that. We are people under the sun. A lot of us worship the sun in various forms. You have to think about that one. with that, we all have a color. Because if we didn't, we would be translucent. We wouldn't be physical. We are in the image of man. That is our form. The head, the legs, the brain, all that. The problem is we didn't come with a manual about being. So you have to figure this out. There are some foundational things that many doctrine have said. Treat others like you want to be treated. Don't steal. Don't lie. This, that, and the other. And there's one that I live by, which is stay in my lane. So if you think about a track race, you get everybody who starts off. Invariably, you can change lanes at some point if you're really running a long race. But you can easily be disqualified if you don't initially stay in your lane and find out where that is. Run your race. This is so important. It's up to you as the being part to figure out what your lane is. Follow that path. It may change and it may have little Y's and T's in it, which gives you another lane and it'll put you back on track later on. But find your lane. And remember this. That little thing in your eye called the iris, it looks like a nebulae in the sky. As above, so below. When you meet someone else who has an iris in their eye, like the one in the sky, or you know they've had one, treat them with love, honor, and respect. Till next time, love you all. Peace.